This is Mike Kenyon here for the Border Historical Society to introduce a lecture given by Professor Jeff Peires to the Border Historical Society on the 19th of September 1989. The talk was about his just launched book, The Dead Will Arise, subtitle Nongqawuse and the Great Xhosa Cattle Killing Movement of 1856-57. The book dealt with a very difficult, sensitive, perhaps embarrassing issue of the cattle killing movement, a controversial issue. It was dealt with carefully, considerately, sensitively, and it still stands as the academic volume on the issue and on the period. More recently, Dr. Nicholas also launched his book on the cattle killing, called The Girl Who Killed a Nation, at the Border Historical Society earlier this year, 2025. The Dead Will Arise picked up Xhosa history from about 1850. It followed on from Jeff Peires' earlier work published in 1981, The House of Parlo, which was perhaps the most important history of the Xhosa since the volumes of Reverend John Henderson Sorga in the 1930s. 2 volumes he published, the Southeastern Bantu and the Xhosa. Professor Peires in 1989 was professor and head of department at the University of Transkei, UNITRA, having previously been a senior lecturer at Rhodes University, where I was fortunate to be taught by him in 1981-1982. 1994, he became a member of parliament for the ANC, where he was able to use his historical knowledge and insights to address some very serious political challenges in parts of the Transkei territories. Professor Peires has always been a very big, busy promoter of students and writers and amateur historians on Xhosa history and the wider history of the Eastern Cape. Over to Professor Peires. Thank you.
My subject of my talk is the Xhosa cattle killing of 1856 to 1857. This is a tremendously large topic, and I won't try and cover it all 344 pages of it this evening. I'm only going to take one aspect, and afterwards I think there might be time, if there are other aspects you would like me to refer to, I can do that. And the aspect that I've decided to speak about is the beliefs of the cattle killers. What led the people, what beliefs led the people to kill their cattle? Because it seems like such a very, very stupid thing to do. And if you were to go around, I think, to any rural area, either in Ciskei or in Transkei, even to the most remote part of Pondoland, and you would go to say to those people, kill all your cattle, because the dead will arise, they would simply laugh at you. No matter who it was that said that, it is such a funny thing to say that nobody would do it. So the question arises, what was there in the climate of that time? What were the beliefs then in circulation that made this killing of cattle quite a logical and a sensible thing for those people to do? But before I can answer the question, or before I can try and answer the question, I should just like to inform you what the actual message of Nongqawuse was. Because there are various versions. Now, in the year 1874, that is about 20 years after these events, a black journalist named William Wilberforce Gqoba, he was the editor of a newspaper, a Xhosa newspaper, older than Imvo, called Isigidimi Samaxhosa. And he went around interviewing those who had survived the disaster. And he published an article called Isizathu Sokuqhelwa Kwenkomo Nongqawuse, the cause of the cattle killing by Nongqawuse. And of course, you know how people write to the newspaper when there's something they don't agree with? Of course, many people didn't agree with what he wrote, Xhosa people, and they wrote and they said, no, it wasn't like this, it was like that. And from this we get a very good idea, originally in Xhosa, of what those people at that time were thinking. Now, the message of Nongqawuse, as is well known, she was a young girl of about 15 years of age. And she was in the fields, scaring away the birds from the corn. And two strangers approached her. And according to Gqoba, these were the words of the strangers. And these are important. Tell, said the strangers to Nongqawuse, tell that the whole community will rise from the dead, and that all cattle now living must be slaughtered, for they have been raised by dirty hands, because there are people around who deal in witchcraft. There should be no cultivation, but great new pits must be dug for the corn. New houses must be built, and great strong cattle kraals must be erected. Cut out new milk sacks, and weave many doors from buka roots. So says the chief Napakade, that means who lives forever, the descendant of sifuba-Sibanzi, the man with the broad chest. The people must now abandon their witchcraft, for soon they will be examined by doctors. Now, this message is a very interesting message, and it gives us some ideas concerning the beliefs of the time. But there is one other item of background which helps us to understand why the people were killing their cattle. And that is, most of those cattle who were killed during the Nongqawuse time were dying in any case. Even before the time of Nongqawuse, there were cattle dying. A terrible disease had arrived from Europe in the year 1854, that is 2 years earlier. This was the disease known in English as lung sickness. This is not an African disease. This was a disease that was brought from Europe. It landed in a ship at Mossel Bay. And it's a very terrible disease because the cattle die in a very painful way. Their lungs are eaten up. They gasp for air, and they bring up bits of their lung through their nostrils as they're trying to breathe. And it was a very, very agonizing thing for Xhosa people to see their cattle dying in this way. And there was nothing that they could do about it, because no disease of this nature had ever appeared before. And elderly men old chiefs saw in a matter of weeks their entire herd of cattle disappearing. Now, if you drive out past Kids Beach, you will get to Chalumna district. The chiefs at Chalumna, those are the chiefs of the line of Chief Pato. Pato was one of the greatest chiefs of the old days, and he had 2,500 cattle. Of those 2,500 cattle, that's a lot of cattle, 2,400 were killed by the lung sickness before Nongqawuse. His brother had 110 cattle. Of 110 cattle, 110, all of them, were killed by the lung sickness. And this was something that people at that time found difficult to explain, because they applied all the remedies that they knew, and these remedies did not work. Then they said, well, this disease, it must be spread by the witches. And then they killed a few witches, but this also did not help. And they began to wonder, what is going on? And who and why are our cattle dying? And I was looking around, for some old book dating back to the old times that would tell me, before the whites arrived in this country, if people's cattle were dying, how did they react? And here is something from the year 1825, an explanation of how the people reacted to cattle disease. I'm reading now from this old book. When many cattle die at a kraal, the doctors say, that is the Xhosa doctors, say that they see and talk with the shologu, that is the spirit, of some dead person. And they affirm, they say that the destruction of the cattle is the result of the vengeance of the angry shologu for the neglect of his children. In other words, people at that time were believing that if your cattle are dying, it is because you are being punished for something, some bad thing that you have done. So that is the one aspect of this belief. Another aspect of this belief is that it concerns the beliefs that the Xhosa had concerning the creation, concerning the arrival of the first men into the world. Now, I will read to you from a German traveler who traveled in Xhosa land about the year 1805. And he's describing the beliefs of the Xhosa in that year, which was long before Nongqawuse. He says, it is a current belief among the Xhosa that far to the north of their country there is a vast underground cave from which their cattle originally came, and that cows and oxen might still be got from that cave if its entrance could be found and a proper bait silently laid there. The cattle would then come out where they might be taken, and they would bring a blessing. Now, in other words, whereas we have an idea, that is, Europeans have an idea, that God is somewhere up there in the sky, right? And that man sort of fell out of the sky. Xhosa, in those days, and indeed today even, believed that the original source of life was more under the ground. That man came up from under the ground by the Umhlanga. Umhlanga is a reed, because this hole in the ground through which people came up, this was covered by a bed of reeds. And during that time of Nongqawuse, it was said by Nongqawuse and by her uncle, Mhlakaza, that that river where they were living, that is the Gxarha River, near Seagull's Hotel in the Transkei, that it is at that river, at the mouth of that river, in the sea, that the Umhlanga is located. So it is not only the ancestors who are arising, but that there are new people, that the whole world is going to be reborn. Now, coming now to my last point. This regards the influence of Christianity on the Nongqawuse incident. Now, it is often said that Mhlakaza, the uncle of Nongqawuse, was a witch doctor, that he was a superstitious man, that this Nongqawuse incident is due to Xhosa superstition. But this is not so. Mhlakaza was in fact confirmed in the Anglican Church. In fact, Mhlakaza was the very first Xhosa ever to be baptized as an Anglican. And he was a man who knew the Bible very well, and he knew the Ten Commandments, he knew the Lord's Prayer, he knew the service, Christian service, and it is from here that the whole idea of the resurrection comes. Because there is no concept of a resurrection in traditional Xhosa religion. This is something that has come in. And the very name of sifuba-Sibanzi, which is the name which was given to the one stranger who appeared to Nongqawuse, that is a name for Jesus Christ. So, to conclude, the beliefs of the cattle killing had many strands. Some of them were of a traditional Xhosa background, but others of them were taken over from the Christian religion. Now, that is only one aspect. Beliefs do not exist in a vacuum. Something must come up that inspires those beliefs. Action must be taken on the basis of those beliefs. This topic of the cattle killing is a very sensitive topic, and this evening I have deliberately chosen a sensitive aspect of this, because I think we need to face the real issues. I would like to read to you, in case you missed it, from a review of my book that appeared in the Daily Dispatch on Saturday. The Daily Dispatch, or the reviewer, says, "The author," that is me, "while making no attempt to hide the weaknesses and wickednesses of the blacks, tends to be something more of an apologist for the blacks than he is for the whites, who are described as Machiavellian, stony-hearted, and arrogant." That is the whites. And he, that is me, expresses no sympathy or understanding at all for the white colonists caught in the middle of the turmoil. They, of course, were not starving to death. The reviewer continues, "In judging Sir George Grey, Sir Harry Smith, and others, it is perhaps too easy, with the benefit of hindsight and in the comfort of a study in Grahamstown or Umtata, to condemn the administrators of 150 years ago. We are probably still too close to the events 150 years ago for us to take a completely detached view, and the definitive account has perhaps still to be written." Now, I don't want to quarrel with this reviewer. I'm reading the review because I think it raises some important wider points. The reviewer here, who is presumably a white person, feels that I am acting as an apologist for the blacks and I am being too harsh on Sir George Grey. On the other hand, when I was in the comfort of my study in Umtata, a friend of mine, a Transkei friend, came to see me and said he had been talking on the telephone with a lecturer at the University of Fort Hare, that is a Xhosa lecturer. I shouldn't really disclose his name because this is in confidence, but he's not here today. He is a man with a PhD. And this lecturer expressed his great anger and disappointment at my book. He said that he had looked forward to my book because I'm well known as a progressive academic, and yet this entire book is written as a means to get Sir George Grey off the hook, to absolve him of the blame for the cattle killing, because I say somewhere in the book that I don't think he was hiding in the reeds with his face blackened. Now, I think that either one of these two stories would be depressing. But you know, if the one side says I'm an apologist for the other side, and the other side says I'm an apologist for the first side, then I think perhaps I am somewhere near the truth. It is a very curious thing to me that although both whites and blacks are very interested in the story and what he did, and they are not so much interested in Nongqawuse, because this is a very unfortunate incident in which things occurred concerning which I think everybody who is a South African should feel ashamed for the things that his ancestors or her ancestors have done at the time. And what people were hoping from the book was that I would shift the blame onto the other party. And I don't think that that's what history is about. I think what history is about is not about praising this one or blaming that one. You know that history was Adolf Hitler's favorite subject at school. I don't think that we want that kind of history. History is about understanding the past. And I think that although we should endeavor to learn about other people and other cultures, I think that the biggest gift that history can offer us is that we should also try to understand ourselves. Okay, thank you.